All right, hey everyone. My name is Camden Hatley. I'm a PhD student at the Kansas Geological Survey and KU. And at the Governor's Conference this year, I'm going to be sharing some preliminary work on this new project that we just recently started, which is trying to assess the future of groundwater availability in the Kansas River Alluvial Aquifer. So here is a map of the Kansas River Basin in eastern Kansas. And the alluvial aquifer underlies this little strip of cultivated cropland along the floodplain of the river. The aquifer is a super important source of water for irrigation in this area, but over the next few decades, climate is projected to aridify, which might necessitate an expansion of this irrigation in order to adapt to the future drier climate and maintain crop yields. For this project, then, we're looking to understand how exactly climatic conditions and irrigation activity influence groundwater levels, so that we can then assess how much groundwater will be available in this potential future scenario, where farmers are actually more reliant on the groundwater for irrigation. So our specific questions, which are very much in progress still, are number one, how will projected climate changes impact groundwater levels in the aquifer? And then number two, spinning off of this, can irrigation be expanded sustainably alongside these climatic changes? Okay, so our approach for answering these questions is to use a type of time series modeling called transfer function noise modeling to simulate how things like climate and irrigation have impacted historical groundwater levels in 16 monitoring wells operated by the KGS across the aquifer. And then once we get good fit for these models, we can apply some hypothetical future data sets of climate and irrigation to see if groundwater levels within the aquifer experience a significant downward trend. And I don't want to get lost too much in the weeds of how these models work here, but on a conceptual level, they're fairly simple. So they take input time series of things that affect groundwater levels. So here we have precipitation, reference evapotranspiration, and irrigation use. And you apply these transfer functions to each of the inputs and transform those inputs into time series of the impacts of those inputs on groundwater levels. And then you just take all these transformed time series, add them together, and you get a prediction of groundwater levels. But really all the magic happens in these transfer functions right here. So in the model parameterization process, it finds the optimal shapes of these transfer functions that create a good model fit. Okay, so far I've been able to build a transfer function model for 2 wells in the alluvial aquifer, which are marked on the map with these yellow circles here and here. There's a lot of stuff I can talk about regarding the results and output of the models, but for now the key points are really just that this well that we modeled in the western portion of the aquifer fits really, really well to the observed data, which is good news. It suggests that we should be able to get accurate simulations of groundwater levels under future climate and irrigation scenarios once we get to actually applying those. But besides the actual fit of the model, we can look at some of the parameters which are listed here. It might be too small to see on the screen. But we can look at these parameters that are optimized to see if this model actually makes sense physically. When you're modeling future projections, you want to make sure that the model doesn't just have a good fit, but you want to make sure that it's realistically simulating the underlying processes. So when you feed in future data, you're getting results that make sense. And in this case, a couple of the parameters that we have out of this model can actually be linked to physical processes. Like I won't be able to see it, but the top parameter basically says how much groundwater will rise after 1 unit of recharge is added to the system. And in the output, this parameter is pretty close to 1, which is at least in the ballpark of what we'd expect. So further just suggesting that our underlying processes are actually being simulated accurately, which is pretty promising. The other well that we modeled so far is in the eastern portion of the aquifer, and it's located really close to the banks of the Kansas River, so it's within 1/4 of a mile. And the influence of the river is super strong here and can be seen in the fact that we actually need to include river stage as an additional input to get a decent model fit. So this is not really ideal for future modeling because it'll be really challenging to get future predictions of stream flow to create this simulation in the future. But that's a challenge that we'll be addressing in the future. Okay, so just to quickly wrap up what we've done so far, we've created some initial time series models of groundwater in the Kansas River Alluvial Aquifer. And we found that our methods can definitely create some accurate simulations of historical data, which is super promising for our ability to predict future groundwater levels. The main caveat here is that model performance is going to be variable across the aquifer, and places that are really close to the riverbank might be a little bit more difficult to assess. In any case, though, our future steps are to continue going forward with this methodology. We're going to create some initial models for more locations throughout the aquifer, so expand to the other 14 wells. Refine these models by adding some additional historical data and some tinkering. And then finally, we'll get to the exciting part, which is applying some hypothetical future data sets to see what happens with the groundwater in those future scenarios. And we have some ideas for what these data sets will look like. So for instance, our climate projections are going to come from widely used global climate models and different emission scenarios. But the irrigation data is a little bit more up in the air. We can test some flat out increases in irrigation or flat decreases in irrigation, which might come about if other agricultural adaptations in the area create water savings. But if there are any other ideas for interesting irrigation scenarios, I'd be happy to hear them and test them out. Okay, so that's all I have for this year. Again, my name is Camden Hatley. My contact email is at the bottom right of this poster, and I want to thank you all for listening.